Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Hey everyone, my name is Brianna Andrews and I am the Indigenous Student Rep on the Student Union this year. I am here to remind you and acknowledge the land that we are on. UNB and its interactions take place on unsurrendered and unceded territory of the Wolastoq people. I just want to remind you that. I hope you enjoy your event and you always stand up for what's right. Have a great day.
Before we get started today, we'd like to take this time to acknowledge the racial injustice that is happening in our world today. We understand that TEDxUNB is a platform for ideas worth sharing, and we felt like it would be inappropriate to not talk about the racial injustice happening both in our communities close to home and those throughout the world. We understand that there's things that we need to correct, and TEDxUNB is determined to fight for a future that is fair and just, both for ourselves and for the generations to come.
Hello everyone, my name is Jackson Weir.
And I'm Brianna McQuillan.
And we are your co-chairs for TEDxUNB 2020. Welcome to the event. We understand it looks a little bit different this year, but we're still super excited to have you join us. Our theme for TEDxUNB 2020 is Blueprint, and we think now more than ever, we should revisit where we've come from, assess where we are now, and plan for the future in these difficult times. So we hope you'll enjoy the speakers today. We have a great lineup with some great ideas we're sharing.
We'd like to take this time to thank everyone who made today a possibility. We would not be here today without our amazing team of dedicated directors who meet throughout today's conference. Without them and their hard work and passion to make TEDx a successful event, we would not be here. We'd like to take this time to thank our sponsors who continue to support us year after year, as well as you, our delegates. Without you guys, we would have absolutely nowhere to spread our amazing ideas that UNB has and those ideas that are worth sharing. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy your time.
Our first talk of the morning, titled Overcoming the Empathy Gap, the key to overcoming a societal lack of empathy, will be given by Fareeha Quayyum. So please join me in welcoming her to the virtual stage.
I want you to think about the last time you had a conversation with someone that felt like talking to a brick wall. If you actually can't think of any recent conversation like this, honestly, I'm so happy for you. But from what I've seen in the 20 short years I've been on this earth, most of us have had at least one absurdly frustrating conversation. Whether it was working retail, doing a school group project, or trying to convince a little kid that you're babysitting that, no, you absolutely cannot put a metal fork in an outlet. Sure, some of these stories are great icebreakers, but dealing with someone that refuses to hear what you're saying takes a toll on you. If you try to talk to someone who's decided, actually, I will make no attempt to relate to you once during this conversation, you might get a lot of back and forth, but very little comprehension or learning. That's not a real conversation. But that's what happens with a lack of empathy, which is precisely what I want to focus on today. You see, we live in a culture that kind of encourages us to be terrible people. That is to say, it's really, really easy and almost natural for us to downplay the feelings of the people we surround ourselves with. This explains how sometimes we do things like tell our friends after they finally open up to us that their problems aren't that bad, or ostracize a new kid at school if they seem a little bit weird, and then make fun of the new kid for crying in the bathroom every day at lunch. And on a completely unrelated note, I was not one of the people who enjoyed high school. I guess you could say that was part of the reason I grew to be really interested in what drives us to be terrible people. Because one thing I kept observing over and over, almost like clockwork, is that all of our classrooms have these cute, inspirational posters on the walls that say things like, treat others the way you want to be treated. And then it's in these same classrooms that you'll hear kids using every violent and historically oppressive slur under the sun. And that does not check out. Like, okay, we were 14 and our prefrontal cortexes weren't fully developed. That could explain away the fights we got into with our parents for no reason, sure. But how do you explain an active interest in harming minorities? Like your average angsty teenager, I turned to literature for clarity. And lo and behold, I found the answer. Apparently, our natural inclinations towards being really mean people have a biological basis. Research shows evidence of an empathy gap between members of an in-group who are people that share the same genetic, cultural, or ideological traits, and members of an out-group who don't have these traits. There's an actual difference in brain activity and the amount of mirror neurons that start firing when we're in a position to empathize with someone who's either part of an in-group or an out-group. And here's the thing about the empathy gap in in-groups and out-groups. Our ability to A, understand the emotional states of individuals in our lives, and B, understand the conditions of marginalized groups, they overlap much more than you might think. The people in our lives are so diverse. They're so different in terms of their cultures, family backgrounds and dynamics, their genders, orientations, and then all the things that motivate them, and the stuff their dreams are made of, and all of the baggage that they carry and the obstacles they overcome every day. These traits are all so unique. So I guess the reason that I find the empathy gap being hardwired into our biology such a terrifying concept is because the way we communicate with others when we lack empathy is a tool we can use to uphold systems of oppression. It sure explains a lot of the ways that I've seen people hurt each other and not care about it. When we lack empathy, the fundamental humanity of someone in an outgroup isn't a given. It's not immediately obvious. It explains how every time my friends in middle school made a joke about my skin being darker than theirs, they couldn't comprehend why I lashed out the way I did and told me to calm down, and why I just started to go along with it and join in the self-deprecation. It's because they never understand. My mom, a new immigrant and also one of the only immigrants in small-town Newfoundland in 2007, took my sister to the playground when a little girl came up to her and asked, "Are you an alien?" And my mom, still coping with the anxiety that comes with hypervisibility, laughed because, yeah, this girl was only like 4, and her parents wouldn't understand why they should teach their daughter better than to ask questions like that, because they just wouldn't get it. I think of the friends that have come out to me as we stayed up all night at summer camp, and they've told me that they have to hide this important piece of themselves from their homophobic parents for the rest of their lives, and just accept the fact that their parents are going to miss 1,000 of their important firsts, and that they have to lie when they get asked questions like, "What happened at school today?" because they won't get it. I think of every single story from a woman that I care about where they tell me how they suffered from a serious incident of gendered violence. And I am sure I have now heard a million of these stories. And it kills me each and every time when they just have to come to terms with the fact that a lot of men in their lives will seriously hurt them, and they just have to deal with it through gritted teeth, because they won't get it. And that's not an inclusive list. It barely scratches the surface. These negative experiences were all caused by a lack of empathy, which led to a breakdown in the way that people interacted with members of outgroups. After all, empathy facilitates social understanding and shapes our interactions. And it is through our interactions with others that we design the blueprints of our identities. And my identity is built of all my hopes and ambitions and all my experiences and memories. And also all of my damage, whether it's sudden changes I've faced, or self-esteem issues, or personal losses that have shaped me into who I am. But then there's another type of damage I don't tend to acknowledge, which occurs when I accept that they won't get it. It keeps coloring all of my interactions, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't do a number on my mental health. They don't understand my fundamental humanity. I have to prove it constantly, as a student, employee, artist, friend, whatever. Everything I build myself up to be means so little when I realize nobody is going to give me that fundamental humanity. Yeah, I can get the awesome position I've been dreaming of after spending forever preparing for the interview. And then yeah, that same night, people can joke about how I'm just a diversity hire. The work I put in means nothing to them. But hey, why should I complain? I've known those were the rules of the game since I was born. The empathy gap dictates to us that if you're a member of an outgroup that faces systemic, widespread forms of stigma, then the traits, the genetic, cultural, or ideological traits that are so central to your identity, these are the parts of you that are wrong. I talked about the bigotry of middle school kids and homophobic parents because their bigotry didn't just cause them hurt feelings, and don't get me wrong, those hurt feelings do matter so much. But their bigotry is also one of the many channels that society as a whole uses to reinforce the way we think, feel, and most importantly act in response to people different than us. Racism, xenophobia, patriarchy, all these different systems of oppression flourish when we decide people aren't even worth trying to relate to. And then we put these unfair expectations on members of outgroups to just persevere in the face of opposition. Sure, some of us will be able to accept ourselves despite everyone telling us how wrong we are. But frankly, not everyone has the resilience to thrive in an environment where even their family and friends reject them, the people who are supposed to understand them. Is that hard to conceptualize? Take the girl who found out she just has to work with a bunch of people that spent their night making fun of her for being the diversity hire. She has a couple of options in front of her. She could bring it up to her superiors or confront her colleagues directly, but at what cost? She's the only person of color in that whole group, so she thinks to herself, yeah, they probably wouldn't even get why that's such a slap in the face to me. They won't know how to deal with it, and I'll look like a crybaby. Worse, I'll look like the aggressor and be swiftly removed from the team. So she instead chooses to swallow her hurt feelings, pretend nothing ever happened, and keep working with the people that only see her as the diversity hire. I did all of that a little while ago, and honestly, it's one of the stupidest things I've ever done. I shouldn't have had to do that. So I sincerely hope at this point you agree with me when I say that the concept of the empathy gap sucks. Like, maybe as a 14-year-old nihilist, I happily accept the thought of this cognitive bias wreaking havoc on the interpersonal relationships of anyone who belongs to an outgroup. But that had a lot more to do with the fact that I was so desperate for some type of answer as to why such a thing even happened. As a slightly more well-read 20-year-old, I now realize that systems of oppression are complex and don't just stem from the formation of in-groups and out-groups. As a slightly more impatient 20-year-old, I'm also tired of making excuses for people that choose not to relate to me because of things I will never be able to control. Offering empathy to someone else, even in the face of difference, that's the bare minimum. This traditional notion that we are born either being really good at empathy or really bad at empathy is one I'm sick of. We are not static beings, and we, as a collective, can change our approach to empathy by viewing it as a decision we make. Every time we're in an empathetically challenging situation, we can either choose to disengage from putting in relational effort, or we can choose to engage with our emotional state and actively invest our energy into being empathetic. If we're the victims of a natural, maybe evolutionary instinct to ostracize others, then that means we need to put in the work to understand others. Because empathy is not as automatic as we make it out to be. But it starts with willingness. You've got to be willing to spend time talking to someone who might otherwise be excluded. And you've got to be willing to talk to them in a genuine and positive way, so that you might start to understand the full range of their complexity. What unique perspective do they offer? What's their history? What's their sense of humor like? You can ask more questions. You can be a better listener. There are so many ways in which we can make legitimate attempts to be more empathetic and override what we consider an automatic lack of empathy. Making this effort is crucial, because it's the way we can reduce stigma, reduce conflict, and produce more positive social outcomes. Accepting and being yourself becomes so much easier when you finally feel like someone's listening to you. When one of my classmates finally stood up to my friends and told them to stop making racist jokes, and didn't even shy away from using the word racist, I felt like I got my voice back. When the people in small town Newfoundland saw that my mom felt shy about speaking English because she wasn't fluent yet, they would constantly go out of their way to talk and make conversation with her, get to know her as a person, and make her feel comfortable. And these days, she actually won't stop talking. We owe it to everyone else in this world to fully be able to empathize with them. I want so badly to be recognized as a complex human being, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way so strongly and so desperately. The relationship between our personal interactions and social hierarchies is complicated, but if we stop allowing implicit biases to influence the way we interact with the people in our lives, we render this one tool of oppression powerless. And when we give people their fundamental humanity, we're able to develop the resiliency that allows us, as a diverse and wildly different set of people, to survive in the face of conflict. And sometimes it's just as easy as having a real conversation with someone. That's why I'm a firm advocate for overcoming the empathy gap.
Hello everyone, my name is Bhavar Pratap Malhotra and I'm the Speakers Director for this year's TEDxUNB 2020. I'm here to introduce our next speaker, Prevail Laurent. Prevail is in her final year of study here at University of New Brunswick. Prevail's talk is titled Slacktivism, which focuses upon the importance of social media in today's world. Therefore, please help me to give a warm welcome to Prevail Laurent and her title talk, Slacktivism.
Hi, my name is Prevail, and I will be introducing the topic Slacktivism, going beyond online engagement. I believe that it is our responsibility as humans to make the world a better place for everyone. We are capable of doing so, and as a species, it is our willingness to evolve that has brought upon revolutions and societal progress. Change is about embracing the unknown. Change brings upon an excitement because of the new opportunities it provides for growth. but it also brings a fear of the new challenges to face. Regardless of our feelings towards change, it happens around us all the time. So, what is change? Change is defined as anything that is different from what has been consistently accomplished. And today we will be looking at changes accomplished through activism. Activism are actions that bring about political, economical, and social change. It has been present throughout history, leading to developments that have allowed us to enjoy the freedoms we have today. Activism works by establishing a social responsibility to talk about issues that impede growth and create a public commitment where people develop a willingness to invest in causes that they believe in. There are many forms of activism, and one of the most conventional forms of activism is protesting. And although protesting may not always yield to immediate change, it does promote long-term restructuring. Activism doesn't necessarily change the way decision makers think about issues, but it does start conversations, and conversations stimulate reform. Believing in activism is a choice. It is also a choice on how you choose to attain change. Engaging in activism sometimes correlates to your background, your morals, your values, and what you believe to be meaningful to you. However, I think that we can agree that the general idea of activism is mostly looking at a bigger picture and taking intentional measures to help others. In our modern society, the measures in which you take to promote change or raise awareness has become largely impacted by the use of social media. In the age of technology, there is no denying that digital communication is impacting our lives and reforming the major social issues of our era. There is no question that the internet has made it easier to organize mass campaigns by creating an abundance of distribution channels and by lowering the cost of organizing a campaign. It has enabled more people than ever before to get their message out to a much wider audience. With all the good that technology has created, it appears to have a negative connotation when associated with activism. Slacktivism, a demeaning term used to undermine anyone who chooses to engage in #movement. Slacktivism was first used to describe young activists who could not engage in big efforts of social justice like protesting. Today, choosing to engage in online activism is seen as being lazy and deemed ineffective. What is contrary to this is that the study was done in 2011 and it found that people who use social media to promote causes were actually twice as likely to support those causes both online and offline. Publicly shaming people who use social media for social change is not productive. Rather, we should focus that energy to encourage each other to be better people in our society. When you witness an injustice in the street or at work or in shopping centers, speak up and report crimes or offer your support. But when you're far away from an injustice, there is no shame in using social media to reach those who can directly help victims. I don't believe there is a conventional method in creating change. Things like speeches, marches, and sit-ins are only tools, and social media is just another tool. Sure, there are people who will passively post likes on Facebook and never talk about the causes again, but similar groups of people can be found in almost any organization. What is important here is that we focus on the positives amongst the adversity. There are many social injustices that one can choose to focus on, such as homophobia, child abuse, labor exploitation, and racial discrimination, to name a few. For me, racial discrimination is an injustice that has continued to survive for so long that I cannot believe it is still a battle in my time. When the Black Lives Matter movement reached its peak this year, I wanted to partake in the movement, but I didn't know how. Social media seemed like a possible solution, considering that I spent most of my time on social media. Having the Black Lives Matter movement definitely made things easy for me. But what became a challenge was that as someone who is used to abstaining from sharing or communicating matters related to any social or political views that may offend or cause harm, I had to find a way around it. I had to become comfortable with sharing my views to a wider audience. But posting online stories and Facebook on Instagram and sharing posts quickly created another dilemma for me. I wanted to be able to partake in this social movement in a way that was effective and sustainable. With social media, I could reach many people, but affecting change is another thing. So I attended street marches and started to get comfortable in engaging in racial conversations. I still felt like that wasn't enough. I kept putting out more informative posts on my social media and reading more about racial discrimination so that I was up to date with current matters. And I still felt like there was more I could do. But what I came to realize is that my experience has taught me that I don't need to create flashy big changes. I can do what I do best, and that is starting conversations. After all, change is obtained by starting conversations. Conversations through social media can help masses understand politics and society at large better, and help people recognize that they have the power to make a difference, even in small ways. Social media activism is the kind of activism that literally any person can do. It does not require any elaborate special skills, only that you set up a social media account and use your platform for good. And although some may view slacktivism as a compromise for real activism, those two go hand in hand. This online advocacy is actually really powerful, not only in raising general awareness about social injustices, but even how government partake in it. On June 2nd, 2020, thousands of black boxes filled the screens of mobile phones, tablets, and computers with the hashtag Blackout Tuesday to show solidarity against systemic racism. The number of black squares that nearly crashed social media does not correlate with the amount of change that has been seen since then, indicating that people are not going beyond the hashtag. The takeaway here is that hashtag or temporary profile picture usually does little on its own, but combined with activism, we can start to see a difference. There is evidence that going beyond hashtags can lead to change, one of them being the Ice Bucket Challenge in 2014, in which the ALS Association, short for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, was able to raise funds to help scientists to discover an important gene contributor of the disease. The Black Lives Matter movement has led to a continued space in which includes stage funding and logistical support for Black queer youth in Toronto. Most importantly for me as a Black person in New Brunswick, I am happy to see that New Brunswick has established an official Black Lives Matter chapter to highlight problems faced by Black members of the community. These are some of the few examples in which a hashtag activism has played a role in achieving. So how does one go beyond sharing a post or liking a post about a social injustice that they care about? Social media engagement has little to do with how many followers you have or how many likes, comments, and shares you can get, and more to do with having an engaged audience. You could have thousands of followers, but if your posts are limited, misguided information, you could lose the interest of your followers, leading to ineffective online activism. And the most important step in providing quality content to engage your audience is educating yourself thoroughly to avoid spreading misinformation. It is important that you know your audience, so ask them questions and encourage your audience to ask you questions. Educate your audience by providing proper resources and advice. Going beyond online engagement can be achieved when you have created a network that goes far beyond existing social gaps through shared values and meaning. Such a social connectivity gives access to a wider range of ideas, perspectives, experiences, and most importantly, representation. So I urge each and everyone here to pick an injustice that they feel has meaning to them and to take the next step. You don't have to make grand gestures, and you certainly don't have to be perfect in your quest for change. Take baby steps and see where your feet might lead you. You might be surprised at what you're capable of. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lucas, and I am the creative director for TEDx 2020. Our next guest is Peter, who presents an interesting topic upon the subject of the rise in computer vision and how it can change our approach to disease diagnosis. Since an early age, Peter sought to explore new innovations in computer science and their possibilities of betterment in everyday life. Let's hear him.
Did you know that in developing countries, the survival rate for leukemia patients is almost 3 times as low as that of developed countries? Now, if you were someone in a developing country and you are experiencing symptoms of leukemia, so you go to your local clinic for a checkup, what might happen is they cannot diagnose you right away due to the lack of trained personnel and expensive equipment. Can you really afford to wait a couple of days for them to send your blood slide over to a larger hospital before getting your results back, when a couple of days in leukemia diagnosis could be the difference between life and death? Now, what if I told you that we can have an AI physician? A software that essentially looks at images of leukocytes and uses an algorithm to determine whether or not they are tumorous. That's the concept of computer vision. And in recent years, there's been this really hot thing in machine learning called convolutional neural networks, which essentially use an algorithm to find out exactly what features are the most distinguishing of an image, such as, for example, on a tumorous leukocyte, what shapes and proportions distinguish a tumorous leukocyte from a benign one. Now, I know that sounds a bit like a superpower, but truth to be told, with the amount of data we are generating today, it really is. And I'm going to explain why. So I'm not going to pretend like computer vision didn't exist before this presentation, because it has been there for a very long time, and we have been working on applications such as face detection and optical character recognition. But if I were doing this presentation, let's say 15 years ago, using traditional computer vision methods, so no convolutional neural networks, no deep learning, essentially the way computer vision will work is the human would have to manually define some parameters for the computer to look for in the image. So for example, in a leukocyte image, perhaps the human would say, okay, so look at the threshold for the color. If the color raises above this value, and let's say the nucleus to cytoplasm ratio is higher than this, then deem it as a tumorous leukocyte, and otherwise it would be benign. But that's not really how we do things, is it? Forget about leukocytes for a moment. Let's say you go home and your mother comes out to greet you. When you see her face, is your first instinct to go, okay, so I'm gonna have to calculate the distance between her pupils and look at the color of her lips and the extrusion of her nose, and if each of these values passes a certain number, then I know she's my mother and not an imposter. No, that would be ridiculous, because the way we process images is very complicated, and images of tumorous blood cells are just as complicated and can't really be defined by a certain set of equations. Now, one idea is to use very complicated, intricate mathematical equations to really dive in there and get the most specific attributes that these images may have. Or we can perhaps try using not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but 10, 20 different features or properties to classify these images. But the problem we have with those approaches is essentially when we're classifying it on so many different features, we are essentially classifying it on 20 dimensions or 30 dimensions, and we reach the problem called the curse of dimensionality or overfitting. I'm not going to go too much into it, but essentially, when you have so many features, your accuracy actually starts to decrease because you tend to lose the generalizability of the algorithm. So how do we solve this problem? Because think about it, if we were just using traditional computer vision methods and we were getting like a 70%, 80% accuracy in classifying tumorous blood cells, would that really work? If you were to go to the hospital and someone told you, okay, so there's about a 7 out of 10 chance that you don't have leukemia, but a 3 out of 10 chance that you do, So if you're feeling lucky today, feel free to go home. No, that would be absolutely terrible. So we need to make sure that this is as high as possible. Essentially, the accuracy is as good as a human pathologist. So in order to do that, we have to employ a method that's not just defining the properties of images down to a simple equation, but instead actually employing the machine itself to learn the features of the image, exactly what are the most distinguishing parts of the image. This is where convolutional neural networks come in. So in convolutional neural networks, there's essentially this thing called a filter. And before I get into this, I just want to make sure that we all understand when an image gets entered into the computer, it's translated essentially into a matrix, a two-dimensional matrix of values ranging from 0 to 255 based on the intensity, because that is the only way that computers can really view the image, since they don't really see, they can't really only understand numbers and code. So a filter is, you can essentially interpret it as like a window of values that essentially slides across each of the rows and picks out the features that it thinks are the most contributing to this image. And it does this a few times, and each time it does this, it gets downsampled, and each of these is called a convolutional layer. And at the end, it's going to have a result of what class it is classified as. And based on the data, based on the label data, it's going to work backwards. So based on whether it was correct or incorrect, it's going to work backwards and really find out and adjust each of these filters. So adjust what features it looks for to really optimize the algorithm and make sure that the features that it is finding is actually the most accurate features that it can use. So this is the gist of convolutional neural networks. And it works very well, because if you think about it, if we only did this once or twice or even 10 times, it wouldn't be that accurate. It would probably just be finding irrelevant features. But when we're talking about, the scale of hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of images, it can really make wonders happen. Because with this amount of data, it can really just dive into the deep ends of the image and find out exactly what features are the most contributing to defining this image. So I worked on a project where we used over 50,000 images of acute promyelocytic leukemia leukocytes. So that's a very malignant subtype of acute leukemia. And we were able to achieve an over 99% accuracy in classifying these cells after a lot of reiterations and retrainings, of course. But what impressed me the most is not actually just the accuracy, but also when we showed some of these filters, so some of the features that the convolutional neural network found to professional pathologists, some of them actually couldn't make sense of what the features were. So they couldn't understand what features it was trying to detect. Because, like I mentioned earlier, convolutional neural networks have multiple layers of filters. And really, when you get to the later stages, the later layers, it's no longer classifying simple features such as edges and texture, but it's really accumulation of all the features that came before it, all the layers, all the filters that come before it. So in a sense, it was classifying an image that morphed for itself, that we don't even know what it looks like. So in a way, we have created a robust robot physician. And when you think about it, it's kind of scary, but at the same time, it's extremely powerful. And for someone at the hospital, it might just save their life. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are being generated every day. That's 2.5 million terabytes of data every day, which is 2.5 million times my hard drive. And it's not just pictures of blood cells. There's data on how patients with mental illnesses connect with their doctors, how they describe their symptoms. There's data on how drivers react seconds or minutes before their accident. We live in an era where we have unjustifiably more information, technology, machine learning than ever before in human history. And it's all available to everyone, including this kid who doesn't even pay taxes. How will you harness this superpower as we move forward in these unprecedented times?
Hi everyone, I'm Claire.
And I'm Matt, and we're your co-delegate directors for TEDxUNB Blueprint 2020.
Thank you so much for joining us today and following us along our journey, as we know this year has definitely presented many challenges and difficulties for everyone in their own way.
I hope you've all really enjoyed our TEDx event thus far and the first 3 speakers. We have so many more amazing talks to come, so please stay tuned.
Soon you'll be receiving a link in the YouTube Premiere chat. That link will take you over to Zoom for a big breakout session with Matt and I, and we can play some fun interactive games.
Yep, and after those games, we will be taking a brief break at 11:15, so you guys can grab yourself a glass of water or do whatever you guys need to do. Just make sure to be back on YouTube Premiere for the next speaker at 11:30 a.m. sharp.
When you get over to the Zoom group, you can drop an emoji and let us know how you're feeling, and we'll check in with each other. We'll drop our emoji and let you know how we're feeling after those talks.
Once again, we're super excited to meet you all, and we will see you on the other side.
Hi, I'm Ellen Petrie, the Logistics Director.
And I'm Matt Douglas, the Networking Director.
We're here to introduce our speaker, Brendan Finnerty.
Brendan is a UNB alumni from Rwanda.
His talk is titled Consumerism and Society, Altering the Blueprint.
We hope you enjoy.
I would like to begin by acknowledging that although I am currently speaking in Kigali, Rwanda, the event that I am speaking for is taking place on the lands of the Holistic people. I also acknowledge the wealth of knowledge within the First Nations community, and specifically the knowledge related to the environment that I have had the privilege of learning about during my time in Canada. I would like to note that some of the ideas that I am sharing today came out of learnings I had the privilege of gaining from First Nations speakers at conferences or in conversations with First Nations individuals. Today, I would like to talk about consumerism and how engraved it is in the society that I have been a part of. I know the word consumerism sparks a certain level of discomfort. However, no matter where you are coming from today, I want to challenge you as I have challenged myself to come into this conversation with an open mind. So much of who we are and how we interact with our world is influenced by past generations. I love the theme of this event because it fits in with this idea that we are past a blueprint of what our future will look like. We are handed this layout of how to interact with society, of what is important and of what we need to value. And consumerism is heavily rooted in this layout. This blueprint has been slowly built throughout the years and is altered through every generation. We are told what we need to value in our lives and what we need to strive towards. It is almost as if we are playing this board game that is our lives, and our parents and generations before us have written these rules of engagement of how to succeed at playing this game. In every generation, humans strive to improve. We build off of what we have been given to create a brighter future. We align ourselves on the trajectory that was created by past generations and push to improve our livelihood. And then we pass down the tips and tricks for a successful life. What we do is driven from our desire for a dream future. Which school we go to, the relationships we pursue, the clubs we join, these are all decided for us by the vision of where we are going with our lives. Some of our dream futures are focused on the material and some are focused on the emotional. But whatever this future is, that is what pushes us to engage with life as we do. The blueprint that we have been given is what we use to achieve this dream future. And when that blueprint is wrapped up in consumerism, our dream future can become one of a constant need for more and for better. If we were to discuss taking consumerism out of our society, how would that even work? Can you take out a characteristic of something that is so encapsulated in it? The answer is you can, but we need to approach this change in the right way. Before talking about the removal of something from how our world operates, let's talk about our own role within that world. We all have this personal identity of how we fit into our community, and a large part of our personal identity is what we value. What do we love? What do we care about? What brings us joy? Now, I'm definitely not saying that the only thing we care about is material, but for myself, I would say that a part of who I am and what brings me joy is consuming. Now, that can be hard to admit, and it has been for me. However, the acknowledgement that we are programmed to consume is crucial. I want to see myself as carefree and not tied down to my continuous need for more and for better. But that can be hard sometimes. So is it possible to remove something from our personal identity and still know who we are? Our social culture is what we create it to be, and right now it is embedded with consumerism. When I was 7 years old, my parents sat my brother and I down and informed us that our family would be moving to Rwanda, a small country in the heart of Africa. I had no idea exactly how much this move was going to shape me into the person I am today, change my perspective towards the environment, and alter my personal identity. Just to give you a picture of Rwanda, here are some interesting statistics. In 2008, Rwanda banned all plastic bags from entering the country, either through tourism or through manufacturing. Rwanda holds the #1 spot for percentage of women in parliament worldwide at 61.3%. The last Saturday of every month, an event occurs called Umuganda. On this day, everyone leaves behind the busyness of their lives and goes into their community to make it better. Rebuilding bridges, fixing potholes, rebuilding someone's house that has collapsed. This is the flip side to consumerism that we don't talk about nearly enough. In my world, consumerism is linked to environmentalism, but consumerism can take us out of our community and get us lost within our own personal desires. We can lose that communal connection and replace it with a competitive need for more. Rwanda is a country that holds environmental issues high on its list of priorities. This tiny country that has a population density 100 times that of Canada, and yet has the same percentage of protected lands. Environmentalism is embedded in Rwandan culture in the way that consumerism is embedded in Canadian culture. It is not something that is directly talked about because it is everywhere. When I moved back to Canada for university, this is something that shocked me. My first year, I was not involved in any environmental groups because I was not used to there being environmental groups, but rather an environmental component to every group. In day-to-day life, being conscious of carbon emissions, recycling, waste, plastic usage was normal. So in my second year, with the assistance of UNB Sustainability and ResLife, we started Green UNB. The goal of Green UNB was, and still is, to both be a bridge between students and environmental initiatives, and to try and shift the perspective that we have towards the environment from a place of ownership to respect. When discussing a push to environmentalism through the way of low-impact living and reductionism, two big topics arise: sacrifice and perfectionism. Right now, I want to dive into the word sacrifice. Whenever I'm part of conversations surrounding consumerism, the word sacrifice is almost always brought up, and every conversation seems to land on the idea that consumerism will continue to grow because people are not willing to sacrifice. The word sacrifice is defined as giving up something for the sake of something else. A similar word would be exchange. However, the word exchange does not imply loss, while sacrifice does. The implied loss in sacrifice is thought to be worth it for the return that we are getting. So, is it possible to look at the removal of consumerism from our personal identity as an exchange, as something that does not have implied loss? When the only story that we are being told is that green initiatives involve losing our way of life, why would we want to do that? Why would I want to move from my place of comfort if I am being told that being uncomfortable will cause me hurt? So let's go back to the blueprint that we were talking about before. If we arrive at the idea that we need to alter the blueprint that we have been given, how do we actually go about this? I believe that the way we need to create this new blueprint is through focusing on the path and less on the destination. So many of us, including myself, are using this old blueprint to walk a path that will lead us to environmental disaster and a lack of community. We continue on this path, however, because we know it so well and we are comfortable on it. We never really focus on the path itself, but rather dream about a future without disaster. This alternate future where we respect our world seems so distant because we can't see the path towards it. We know of some clues of where the path lies, but for some reason we don't always seek them out. This is because we are procrastinating. And as a recent student, I'm well acquainted with this term. And sadly, it has clawed its way into my personal sustainable initiatives. I have this great talent for planning. I can make this beautiful plan, but the following through of that plan is the tricky part. We are focused on that good future, yet we are not focused on the path that we are walking, and therefore we are moving further and further away from it. The other topic that comes up along with sacrifice was perfection. In the world of zero waste and low impact living, there is this imagined black and white line where you are either a perfect zero waste individual or you are not at all. If you can't live that out perfectly, there is no point in trying. I know that I have encountered this before when Green UNB tried to run a zero waste month. This was by far the worst event that I have ever run on campus, but it taught me a lot. This event was marketed in a way that a lot of previous zero wasters have since seen the problem with as well. A zero waste lifestyle demands perfection. It creates this all or nothing effect that is impossible to achieve for so many. This idea that you have to give up your entire way of life to begin walking on the right path is a fallacy. Running this program taught me that authenticity was the key to sustainability. It is better to slow your pace on the wrong path and slowly turn around than to never turn around at all. I love that idea that 1,000 people living a moderate low impact life is better than 10 people living a perfect zero waste life. Perfectionism is holding us back because we are looking at the destination of having that alternate future rather than the path to get there. I want to go back to a statement I made earlier about the comfort zone and the word sacrifice. Change is always going to be uncomfortable because we are doing something that is different and challenging. But we need to see that the future that we can achieve when we finally step out of this consumeristic bubble of comfort is an incredible one. We are using the future as the tool to redefine our future. We are talking about how we will change more than how we are changing. We need to use the present as the tool to create our future. Instead of planning out every detail of what the future will look like, let's just decide that it will be good and start making changes today. Let us focus on the system and specifically how to remove that consumerism from it. It is impossible to create the future that I desire with the blueprint that I have been given, because consumerism is like the family heirloom you just don't want. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Taylor Chalker and I'm the Marketing Director for TEDxUNB 2020. I'm so excited to be sharing this day with all of you, and I'm also quite excited to be introducing our next speaker, Rachel Benzler, and her talk titled Planning for a Future You Don't Believe in, a proposal for the future leaders of our world. Rachel is studying leadership and national development and is passionate about creating hope for a generation facing globalization and climate change. Please help me in giving Rachel a warm welcome.
When I was 8 years old, my family moved to Lima, Peru for my parents' work in the development field. One day, I found a bird with a broken wing, and as a dorky homeschooled kid and the daughter of 2 medical care workers, I determined I could nurse it back to health. So I put it in a cardboard box and tucked it away on the roof of our 3-story apartment building. The next day, when I went to check on the bird, the earth started shaking beneath me. It was as if someone had placed the whole world on one of those vibrating workout machines. And fearing for my life, I rushed down the stairs. Panels from the roof started falling behind me, so I ducked into our apartment. I learned later this is definitely not what you're supposed to do during an earthquake. But as a prairie kid, I was a bit out of my element. I was not used to the earth shifting in a way I had no control over, and I experienced for the first time fear of the earth and loss of the stable ground I was used to standing on. In our current age, we are facing fear of the earth, much like that which I faced as an 8-year-old. With the reports of drastic changes in the climate coming, the shaking has started, and we have no idea where to run. In the field of environmental research, I have come to realize just how overwhelming the data is about our climate. In recent years, the media has been oversaturated with images of burning forests, dying coral reefs, flooding cities, rising sea levels, plastic-filled sea creatures, and now a global pandemic. Within the field of environmental research, we are bombarded with statistics, reports, and evidence demonstrating that our climate is changing as a product of human activity. As well, we are overly aware of how little is being done. As students, we attend universities where we are taught of the climate changing, while these same institutions invest heavily in the fossil fuel industry. We face a government that continues to build oil infrastructure instead of investing in sustainable energy, and we battle against the masses of people telling us that we are overreacting for caring about our climate. At a conference this past year for environmental organizations in New Brunswick, a section of the afternoon was dedicated to processing climate grief. We as climate researchers are so overwhelmed with this hopeless information that we've begun to grieve our lost future. I, however, am far too optimistic to embrace a position in which we do not succeed. Humans are far too resilient, far too powerful, and far too determined not to solve this issue. So this is why I've begun to plan for the future I don't believe in. And today I want to introduce my not-so-revolutionary tool for planning for your future, to look at the blueprints and rewrite them into green prints, to imagine the future greener world. My name is Rachel Benzler. I was an environmental research assistant at the University of New Brunswick, an intern on a sustainable farm this summer, and now working as a student consultant for the Nature Trust. I'm also in my last year of my degree, studying a Bachelor of Philosophy in Interdisciplinary Leadership with a minor in International Development Studies. Through my degree and my role, I have learned the importance of hope, and specifically through my research, I have gained a desire to share some of this hope to those watching this video today. Many of you are the future leaders of our industries. However, after the government and society successfully readjust our infrastructure to support the environment and prevent a climate catastrophe, we will need to maintain a level of sustainable industry that we currently do not have. We will be entering into the most innovative period of any industry in the world as we adjust to acting on climate change. So what does this look like? How do we plan for this future? How can we create 5 or 10-year plans with this knowledge? As children, we were told we can grow up to be anything or anyone we want to be. Astronauts, doctors, lawyers, politicians, or in my case, a princess ballerina. Whatever it was, our parents, media, and society was telling us our futures were an open door of opportunity. In my grade 6 year, I decided I wanted to be a spy. In junior high, an actor. In high school, a model. And now a lawyer. Sometimes life gets a bit crazy and we change our minds, but the only limiting factor we were told was our dreams. Our Western generation, however, was never asked to take the environment into consideration. Beyond the normal logistics which limit our abilities to grow up to be ballerina princesses, there are massive environmental factors which we need to take into account. There is undeniable evidence that our climate is indeed changing, and I could spend hours proving this point, but there are so many scientists and young people already advocating for this. So instead, I would rather talk about something less spoken about. What happens if we listen to them? With the current strategies for climate adjustment, the major changes that we require are in our sourcing and consumption of energy through our homes, jobs, and transport. Additionally, the environmental changes already occurring have produced changes in global issues, which will influence the priorities of our future industries. COVID-19 is a perfect example of how quickly our world can transform as a product of a global change. Unfortunately, even if we entirely stopped emitting greenhouse gases right now, climate change would continue for decades. Additionally, individual action, while important, is not the point here. This tool will not give you all the answers, nor will my talk paint a perfectly accurate picture of the future. The 4 key shifts will be in energy production and consumption, transportation, food, and travel. The way these shifts will impact each industry are hard to cover in one TED Talk, so use these categories as indicators for your research into your specific dreams. Think of how changes in energy sourcing might change your industry, or adjustments in consumerism might change your priorities. Imagine how transport reduction might impact your career, or how the emergence of sustainable food sources might change your lifestyle. This thought exercise is about transforming how we dream of our futures to align with a more sustainable picture. So what does this look like? Let's take a peek at the tool on the left, which is an empty format. You can screenshot this if you'd like, or I've included a QR code so you can scan to have access to the PDF version. On the right-hand side, I've shown a partially filled in version. You can use bullet points, or when I used this tool for myself initially, it honestly looked like a bunch of scribbles, and that's okay too. What is important is that you understand your own dreams. So I turned my green print into 5 statements to demonstrate the influence of picturing my dreams as more sustainable. On the screen now, you can see my 5 initial goals without thinking about the environment. Number 1, I want to be a human rights or environmental lawyer and fight for Indigenous citizenship rights in South America. 2, inspired by Dennis Edney, I would like to travel across the world giving speeches to young people about being a lawyer. 3, I want to have a home base in Canada, a dog, a big house, and a car with heated seats. 4, I want to go on vacation every 2 years to somewhere warm. And 5, I want to love my job, be in love, and not be afraid to try new things. Taking the environment into account, this is how the plan changes. I want to be a human rights or environmental lawyer and fight for citizenship rights of displaced peoples. This goal adjusts slightly because I'm anticipating the issues that will come with climate change and also how we'll solve some of the more intersectional issues of climate change. Addressing how our industries will change doesn't just deal with the environment, it also deals with how climate change disproportionately impacts already marginalized communities. So I can adjust my goals to hopefully help those people. 2, inspired by Dennis Edney, I would like to record an online series or lecture for young people about being a lawyer. Again, this goal changes slightly, from traveling around giving speeches live to recording a series online that's accessible from anywhere. While this ultimately shifts slightly, as we all know, the experience of being in person is different, it gives me the opportunity to reach people without having a negative impact on the environment. 3, I want to have a home base wherever I work, a dog, a sustainable house, and a sustainable source of transport, and eat primarily vegetarian or local-based diet. Now, this one has a lot of changes. There's everything from where I'm working to where I'm living to how I'm living. These are important things to picture, especially when it comes to our diet. About 15% of global emissions come from the meat and dairy industry alone, so it's important to address how this might change. 4, I want to go on vacation every 2 years to somewhere close, locally run, and sustainable. Again, this goal changes, but it doesn't take away the core value of what that goal was, which is to have a space to relax and to enjoy myself. So to make it more sustainable, for me in Calgary, I could go to Banff instead of Costa Rica, or I could maybe go to Vancouver. It's still a distance, but it's so much more sustainable than flying across the world. 5, I want to love my job, be in love, and not be afraid to try new things. When it comes to this last goal, nothing needs to change, because ultimately the goal of this tool is not to completely transform how you see yourself living in 5 or 10 years. It's to give you a picture of what that looks like in a sustainable world. Envisioning a future that contrasts the image we were told is success as children is essential to planning for a better future. These are really just the bare bones of what we need to address. It begins here, but it does not end here. Those who have the social and financial mobility to act on this talk right now are among a small percentage of the entire global population. My hope is that in achieving a sustainable world, this tool will be useful for anyone. It is a simple format for dreaming of your future, of picturing a sustainable life instead of a nuclear family with a white picket fence. It allows you to envision a whole different future. My hope is that our generation will be the last to have to ask these questions, that we will be the last ones to have to shout, "How dare you?" and that we can look at the future generations and say, look what we can accomplish when we work together, when we ask questions and when we act quickly. When that earthquake struck over 10 years ago, the clock on our wall fell to the ground and broke. The time was frozen to the exact second that the earthquake struck. Time was stopped and any time to prepare was gone, and we had to pick up the broken pieces of our fallen roof tiles, shattered mirrors, and broken dishes. But the clock hasn't run out for us. It has not stopped, and we still have time. We will solve this problem. So start planning for the future you don't believe in, and the shaking ground won't seem so scary anymore. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Khan and I am the sponsorship director for TEDxUNB 2020. I am so happy to be here and to introduce all of you to our last speaker, who is also a UNB alumni. She has worked across New Brunswick to support entrepreneurs. Please welcome Holly, and she's here to present a unique talk about gathering pieces of a new plan. Let's go.
When we're young, we daydream about what the future holds. Family, teachers, even our peers ask us who we want to be when we grow up. A firefighter, a fairy princess, a movie star. Maybe you want a big family, or maybe you plan to have exactly 2 daughters and 2 sons, and you have their names already picked out. My first plan was to become an artist, and I also wanted to be a mom to 5 kids someday. And then I changed my mind and decided that I was going to be an astronaut and live on Mars all alone. When we're young, our blueprint for the future changes constantly, and it's no issue. Because we haven't yet figured out who we are, we get to write and rewrite our plan forward. But what happens when we get to be a little bit older and we start to write that plan in ink? When we make decisions that have a lasting impact, do we get the chance to rewrite our blueprint then? When I was a teenager, I decided that I wanted to go into sciences. Specifically, I wanted to be a flight surgeon. I wanted to be a space doctor. It sounds like something straight out of a childhood dream. I had researched which programs I could attend and what credentials I would need and how many years I'd need to study to get there. My starting point was to enroll in a chemistry program when I arrived in university, except I didn't actually end up liking it. University chemistry was a lot different from high school, and suddenly the whole chain of education I had planned for myself was in jeopardy. My carefully crafted plan, rooted in what I had previously thought I knew, and strong encouragement from those around me, started to fall apart in front of my eyes. Life has a funny way of seeing a well-laid-out plan and ripping it apart. So what do we do when we're sitting with the pieces of a blueprint we thought would hold us together? I think we have to go back to that childlike sense of wonder, where we weren't afraid to move on to Plan B, or Plan C, or Plan D, or Plan Y, where we were okay taking in new pieces of information and going back to the drawing board is where we need to be now. When you're 5 and you want to be a doctor someday, it makes sense until you get a little bit older and decide that isn't right, and then it doesn't make sense anymore. And so you move on to deciding that you're going to be a secret agent. Easy as that. Each day, when we're young, we're gathering the information we need to build our guide forward. But what I don't think many people realize is that you don't stop gathering those pieces of information when you become an adult. We're all constantly working on the idea of our future with new pieces showing up every day. Maybe you've always wanted to move to Vancouver, but you fall in love with someone who says they'll never leave their hometown. Or maybe you plan to go back to school, but those plans are shifted because you're starting a family. When I pictured the blueprint of my life, I saw a big sheet of paper with an outline that showed blanks to be filled in as you go. What I've come to realize, though, is that it's more like a complicated puzzle where some pieces we get to fit in ourselves and others have already been chosen for us. And every day we get new pieces, and for that I'm grateful. If I had only ever paid attention to the very first piece that said artist, I would be drawing a lot of stick figures today. Or if I had decided that my puzzle was complete when I found the piece that said flight surgeon, or that I thought said flight surgeon, I didn't understand what that piece was trying to tell me until I saw the piece that made me realize that I wasn't suited for science. And none of this is easy. It's very hard to admit when you read your blueprint wrong, and it's even harder to admit it to others. I've tried to force pieces into my life puzzle that didn't belong because I didn't want to change my blueprint. I thought it was supposed to be a permanent reflection of my path forward, not a living, evolving thing that grew with me. So why are so many of us stuck on the idea of having one clear path in our lives? Well, a lot of recent research shows that our lives today won't follow a straight path in the way that many generations before us did. This was the example that was set for us, but the ways that our society has changed means that things like career trajectories aren't the same as they used to be. Baby boomers are likely to have spent most of their careers with a select few organizations, and Gen X will stay in jobs up to 20% longer than later generations. But millennials and Gen Zs, on the other hand, will change careers up to a dozen times. And some futurists even predict that the next generation may hold up to 40 jobs in their lifetime. The later generation is also dating more, getting married later, and sometimes not even getting married at all. Millennials are waiting on average 5 years longer to get married than previous generations, and a quarter of millennials are estimated to never marry. The world has changed, and along with it, the way we expect our lives to unfold is changing as well. So if you're looking at your blueprint and maybe you aren't happy with it, or you're standing, just like I did, with one that has fallen apart, I have a few pieces of advice to offer. Number 1, learn to make your notes in pencil, not pen. It's tempting to lay out a 10-year plan, complete with every life change you could imagine, but the odds of that being anywhere close to accurate is slim. Having an idea of where you're going is good, but when you accept that you also won't truly know what's next until you get there, it's a lot easier to accept those inevitable changes that happen in life. Number 2, don't try to fill in the blanks too soon. It's easy to look at the pieces of your story that you've already assembled and assume it shows you everything you need to know. There are some blanks, sure, but you can make a pretty good guess as to what goes into those pieces. But I think if what we guessed was always true, that would make for an incredibly boring life. Imagine knowing what's coming next forever. No coffee shop meet cute that changes your life because you plan to meet your partner at school. Don't assume that just because you have some pieces, you have them all figured out. I've found it quite embarrassing to announce that I've gotten it figured out, only to realize that I have nothing figured out at all. And when that fails, tip number 3 is don't be afraid to admit that you read the plan wrong. It's easy to get it wrong. I've done it lots, and not just my 5-year-old inner artist showing up. As an adult, I've settled on things that didn't work out. I've planned for things, and life showed up and threw a wrench in all of my plans, and I've had to swallow my pride and make changes. If you have the chance, I'd like you to do something with me. I'd like you to draw a puzzle. So take some paper and draw a big square, and then draw some squiggly lines to break it up into as many pieces as you'd like. Okay, now pick some pieces that you'd like to fill in and decide on some things to write in them. Maybe you love rock music, or family always comes first for you. Write down whatever comes to mind, but the key is to stop before you fill in every piece. Now, take a look at your blueprint. In my case, I was always deeply overwhelmed by all the missing pieces. How could there be so much I haven't figured out yet? But with time, I think I've come to appreciate the fact that my blueprint is only half finished. There's so much left for me to learn about the world, about myself. There are plot twists and happiness and sorrow that I haven't even considered yet. And that's pretty scary, but it's also pretty exciting in a way. And if it feels too overwhelming to look at all that blank space, I encourage you to set a big picture goal. Think about what you want your blueprint to look like when it's finished. Not the individual steps you want to take, but the big overall picture. What do you see? Happiness? Passion? Love? Anything is good. Instead of deciding what each piece of your blueprint will be, decide on what you want it to look like when it's done. And then focus on looking for the pieces that align with your end goal. No one knows where they're going, which is exactly why we have to have a blueprint to guide us. And when faced with uncertainty, it's great to have a guidebook lighting your way. That's part of why we're here today, hearing everyone's thoughts about blueprint. I would recommend that you just leave space for whatever comes next somewhere in your plan, so that you can appreciate all of life's twists and turns. So to sum it all up, I encourage you to reach back into your memory and remember what it was like to be free, to imagine that you could be anything at all, even a cowboy space princess or an artist. Look at your life and remember that it's not too late for you to become anything at all, even if it's not what you set out to do. It might take some more effort to change your path than it did when you were young, but it's still very much possible for you to look at your life today and know that anything could happen next. And personally, I think that's just so very exciting. Thank you.
That concludes our talks for the day. We hope you all enjoyed.
Even though our talks are done, our event is not over. TED is known for its networking opportunities, and we still plan on providing that virtually. Go ahead and click the link in the chat, and we'll see you soon.